I think too many Democrats that I see here in Washington today of the sort of professional Democratic class, they define their own self-interest as the national interest. I think many of them actually they use this existential rhetoric about the nature of the Trump threat and they raise money off of it. And I don't think they really believe it.
And there's this hope amongst Democrats that should there be this big blue wave, that they, at least in the House, that Trump will be able to be stopped in his tracks, or there'll be some kind of brakes applied, and then that'll lay the groundwork for 2028. And maybe there will be a Democrat elected in 2028 if there are free and fair elections, and that things will go back to some version of normal. Do you think that's at all a possibility?
Well, I mean, first of all, Joe Biden campaigned on the idea that there was a possibility of a reversion to a status quo ante. He was the candidate of normalcy, and I think he proved pretty definitively that we're not going back. The America of November 1st, 2016 doesn't exist anymore, and we're not going back to that world. Too many lines have been crossed, and we basically have a radicalized minority party that has not only taken power in the country, but is, governing in a very aggressive way to, not just kind of shatter norms, but to, change the structures of American government and to change how our laws are enforced, and indeed to change who has the power to decide how laws should be enforced. And so I think it's not going back, first of all. Second of all, I've heard many Democrats here in Washington make this argument. And I think that's where I like to say to people, the interests of the Democratic Party, capital D, are aligned with, but they are not the same as the interests of our democracy, small d. And, in other countries that have experienced this kind of democratic rollback, it's civil society that has had to come forward and link arms together and, try to hold the line on institutions and laws. And, I think too many Democrats that I see here in Washington today of the sort of professional Democratic class, they define their own self-interest as the national interest. And, it's unfortunately, it's not about just winning, a handful of competitive seats in a handful of states. That is not the extent and by any means of the damage that's being done right now to the society. And I think many of them actually they use this existential rhetoric about the nature of the Trump threat and they raise money off of it. And I don't think they really believe it, actually, deep down. I think they think, to a certain extent, this is a sort of very extreme version of one of the oscillations in American politics that we've been having. And I think they're wrong.
You've covered Russia. So do you use that as a window into what could happen here?
Yeah, I mean, that's why you and I have talked before, for this group. And that's why I was so alarmed before the voting in 2024. And I tried to explain, the time to defend your institutions and your rights is before they're taken away. It is much, much harder to get them back. And like people would cite, for example, the positive example of Poland, where, a kind of autocratic leaning right wing party was in power, but it was in power for a decade before, civil society in Poland, locked arms and was able to actually win an election despite the headwinds, of the ruling party changing the media laws, changing the public protest laws, all those things. And, I don't know that where we are, we can take another 10 years of this power relationship being what it is today.
Hi, I'm Pat Morrison, one of the hosts of America at a Crossroads. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and connect directly with our guests in our weekly live streams. Thank you for watching.
acting before things were taken away. Democrats didn't do that. They were not prepared, as we now know. When Trump came back to power in January of 2025, they were essentially supine and civil society. Look at the leaders of law firms and the leaders of academic institutions. They just weren't prepared. It's like they weren't ready to believe their own rhetoric about the existential threat that Trump posed to the country. And I think that that's happening again right now when people look at the polls and they say, oh, well, this is great. We're just going to win the House. Because another point that people might not realize is that Trump has already been ignoring the House even when it is controlled by his own party. He is basically governing by executive fiat and daring anybody, Congress or the courts, to stop him. And so I don't think he cares that much about what Congress does. As far as the threat of impeachment goes, well, he's already been impeached twice before in his first term. And if anything, all he proved was the emptiness of that constitutional check on his power, because in the way our politics works right now, you need not just 51 votes in the U.S. Senate to convict someone and remove them in an impeachment trial, but more than 60 votes. And you're not going to get that, even if you get impeached by the House again. So impeachment is a dead letter, constitutionally speaking. The courts, he's already shown a kind of risky willingness to flout various rulings, and he's flouting the will of Congress literally every single day. Better that there should be hearings, better to time them down. I mean, if anything, I think one of the lessons of Trump's first year back in office is that had his opposition been more organized and more prepared and willing to stand up to him, you can tie him down. I think that they kept going with Elon Musk and getting rid of, government employees is because there was no one stopping him. And, Trump uses the courts every day, not because he expects to win all these lawsuits against the Wall Street Journal or, but because it ties them down. It forces them to spend money and time and resources and mental energy on his terms. And I don't think his opponents have learned that lesson from him yet.
Although it does seem like California is suing Trump every other minute.
Yes. No, and absolutely. I mean, California, is definitely, and Governor Newsom have shown this is the way a more aggressive approach to standing up to Trump would have taken. But, you need to link arms. That hasn't always happened. The other states, even other Democratic-run states, haven't always gone along with this approach. And the national leadership in Congress is still very wary of taking him on.
Join us next week when military historian and Washington Post columnist, yes, he's still with the Washington Post, Max Boot, will be in conversation with Larry Diamond about the future of Venezuela.